Let's talk about returning to the gold standard. So I think this is an interesting and important and unresolved area of the theory of the gold standard. The thing that we do not want to do is to return to what we might call a pseudo gold standard or a phony gold standard. Because when that breaks down, and like when Bretton Woods broke down, they will blame, that is the keynesians and monetarists and others, will blame the gold standard for the breakdown. So if you return to a gold standard, you want to go back to a genuine gold standard. All right. So let's look at some of these plans to return to pseudo gold standards. When Alan Greenspan first took office as chairman of the Fed, he and others on the board of governors of the Fed, Wayne Angel being someone else, began to talk about using the price of gold as one of a number of indicators of inflation, okay, or deflation, along with some other commodity prices. So if the price of gold was suddenly rising, that would indicate to Greenspan and the others on the Federal Open Market Commission, or Federal Open Market Committee, excuse me, that there was inflation that is imminent in the U.S. economy. So that would indicate to them, ideally, that they should drain reserves from the banking system and slow down the rate of growth in the money supply. Well, it's not a real gold standard. Just looking at gold as one price among many is certainly not a real gold standard. And so we can criticize it as it really does still leave the monopoly of money squarely in the hands of the Fed. Okay, it's just another indicator to them. They're using it as an indicator. Also, it makes central bank policy gold-plated, meaning that it's not a true gold standard. There's not a gold standard under there, but it opens a gold standard for criticism. All right, and so gold can be blamed for the inevitable failure of this. Now, we came a little bit closer in the early 1980s to a gold standard. President Reagan's advisors, the supply-siders, most prominently Arthur Laffer, Robert Mundell, and Jack Kemp, okay, and other writers at the Wall Street Journal, were pushing for what they called a new Bretton Woods, okay, which was a distorted form of the gold standard in which only the U.S. dollar was, as I said, convertible into gold, and then only for foreign governments and official institutions, not for American citizens. Okay, so it was, and plus, of course, there would be no gold coin in circulation and so on. So they were pushing Reagan to institute a new Bretton Woods, and in fact, Reagan did convene a commission, okay, to study this question. And they held hearings, and it was dominated, of course, by monetarists and other right-wing Keynesian Republican economists. And they came out, the majority report came out against instituting a new gold standard. Murray Rothbard was asked to testify, and he gave a talk and was part of one of the people that wrote up the minority report. Okay, I think George Reisman also testified before Congress on this point. And again, he was one of the few that argued for going back to a genuine gold standard. All right, what was the blueprint, though, that these supply-siders, okay, set forth? One thing about the supply-siders, they want sound money and plenty of it, okay? So they want a gold standard, but they want a lot of money. They want money to be, they want a gold standard that can be inflated in some sense, okay? Well, this is called the Laffer blueprint. He wrote a blueprint on this, Arthur Laffer. He wants the Fed to convert dollars into gold at a fixed price, okay, a range. Okay, so now this is a price fixing scheme. He wanted the Fed to fix the price of gold at, let's say, $400 per ounce, plus or minus $10. So if suddenly the price of gold began to rise towards $410, that would indicate to the supply-siders who believed that gold was a very sensitive indicator of what was going to happen to the rest of the prices in the economy very quickly. They would look on that rise of the price of gold as a warning that inflation was about to break out. And at that point, then, they would go out into the market and they would sell gold, and dollars would come in would return, and the monetary money supply would be reduced. Okay. On the other hand, if the price of gold fell towards $390, that meant that we were going to have an inflation, or there was an impending deflation, excuse me, and the way they would react, the Fed in that case, would be to go into the market, print dollars, and buy gold to drive the price back up to $400. Okay? So now gold really takes the place of government securities as, in open market operations. If you want to increase the money supply, well, you print dollars up, you buy gold. If you want to decrease the money supply, you sell gold for dollars. Okay? And you try to keep the price fixed at around $400. Also, they put in here, which they didn't really need, that there would be what was called a target reserve quantity, that 40% of the Fed's liabilities had to be covered by gold. So the Fed would have gold backing up 40% of its liabilities, which meant 40% of currency in circulation plus bank reserves. Okay? And then the Fed would retain full discretion in monetary policy as long as this target reserve quantity of gold was within 10% of 40%. So in other words, as long as it was plus or minus 40% plus or minus 10%. What would happen if the amount of gold suddenly fell, meaning that there was inflation, below 30%? Okay. Well, then at that point, the Fed could not, its liabilities would be frozen. It could not create any more reserves. It was an attempt to force the Fed to restrict its inflation. Okay. If it fell, if its liabilities fell below, if the gold backing fell below 20% of its liabilities, then they had to reduce the monetary base by 1% per year. In other words, they had to begin to actually reduce the money supply. And finally, if the target reserve quantity fell below 10% of the Fed's liabilities, well, what would happen? Nothing. What would happen would be, well, you have to raise the price of gold now. Okay? So there was no punishment for inflating to the point where they began to lose their gold stock. Okay? So this was not a real gold standard. Okay? This was a phony gold standard. It was a price-fixing scheme. In fact, some of the supply-siders later on said, you know what? We don't even have to buy and sell gold or keep gold. All we have to do is look at the price of gold. So if the price of gold went towards $410, we'll simply take government securities, sell them on the market, absorb some of the dollars, and bring the price of gold back to $400. Okay? And if we had a deflation, we would do the opposite. We go out and we print money and we buy securities. Okay? So that gold didn't need to be what they call the intervention asset. Okay? So they're talking in bureaucratic, technocratic terms. Okay? They had no intention of allowing gold to be the real medium of exchange. Okay? Well, it could be the intervention asset, the asset that you buy and sell to keep the price of gold fixed, or you could use government securities. It didn't matter. Okay? And one of these supply-siders who happened to be my professor at Rutgers when I was getting my PhD was named, his name was Mark Miles. He wrote a book on this, and he basically came out and said, look, we don't need gold in this scheme. Okay? We just need to use government securities and to fix the price of gold. Right? So that Friedman would be right, and the monetarists would be right to call that a price-fixing scheme. In fact, later on, I named it a price rule monetarism. It's simply monetarism. Okay? Regular monetarism, the brand that Milton Friedman promotes, is quantity rule monetarism. Under Friedman's scheme, you would simply increase the money supply at about 3% per year to try to keep the price level stable. Under price rule monetarism, you keep the price of gold fixed to try to keep the price level stable. Okay? So it was basically monetarism, which took into account the fact that the demand for money may change, which quantity rule monetarism doesn't take into account. And if the demand for money changes, well, then you're going to have a change in the price of gold. So, in fact, in Mark Miles' book on this, he said, we're a better brand of monetarism. Okay? The monetarists want to increase money supply at the same rate as the quantity of goods are increasing. But what if the velocity of circulation is changing. There's no way to adjust the quantity rule. But with a price rule, that would affect the price of gold, and we could react to it. All right, so it came down to basically coming up with a rule to kind of, like monetarism, to restrain a government monopoly. Okay, and any rule that you try to come up with to restrain a government monopoly is simply a pious wish. It's basically saying, please don't increase the money supply too fast if you're a monetarist, or please don't let the price of gold rise too high. There's nothing to stop the Fed from doing that. Okay, people aren't there ready to turn in their dollars for gold like in the old days, causing the Fed to fear and the banking system to fear they're going to lose their gold reserves. Okay, so those are the fake gold standards. Now there was an interesting plan, I think which Guido Hulsmann supports,